That's a funny looking Ford 9-inch case. Welcome back to the laboratory. Since the last video, we clicked past 2,500 subscribers, so I wanted to thank everyone that has subscribed to this little channel. I've also had several complaints that subscribers weren't getting notifications for new videos, so double check that you clicked on the bell. And maybe check out my channel for videos you may have missed over the last several months. Now, if you're not already a subscriber, well, go ahead, click the thing. It's not going to hurt. For those longtime viewers, you'll know I have several projects happening here. The GTO, the Monolith, Stupor Stock Mustang, and the Epic, which has been dormant for far too long. So to appease those that patiently waited for Epic updates, while hopefully still tolerating the Mustang and GTO stuff, this video is for you. And honestly, it's for me too, as I'm still angry with both the GTO and Mustang for various reasons, so I needed to shift my attention to something else for a while. The last thing we did was narrow the rear end housing and weld on some control arm brackets, fill and drain plugs. While it now looks like the housing's all finished and painted, the paint is just temporary. I still need to figure out what I'm doing for shock, wheelie bar, and anti-roll bar brackets and then weld them on. Once it's got all the final bracketry, I'll send it out for powder coating. So what I did was I dragged it outside last summer and I went over it with a stripping disc, a die grinder, and a whole bunch of other tools I can't even remember the specifics of already. I'm glad I did it over the summer where I could do it outside because it would have made a colossal mess in the shop. Once it was cleaned up and I got most of the rust off it, I just shot it with a couple of coats of semi-gloss black just to keep it from rusting up again in the meantime. Next, I needed to order up some brakes. Because I'm crazy, if you haven't figured that out yet from watching this channel, and I just have to run row-style wheels on the street to get that proper GT look for the car, we're staying with 4 lugs. As you can imagine, that severely limited my options for brakes, but Willwood came to the rescue with the rear disc setup, equipped with parking brakes, because street car, and these were originally undrilled rotors, so I could put whatever bolt pattern I needed in there. Fortunately, SPP machinist Clayton helped me out by drilling the 4-lug pattern I needed. Now you can see there's 8 holes in here, but it's actually 2 different 4-lug patterns, so we got the brakes handled. With the housing narrowed and the brakes specified, the next order of business was to order up some axles. Since I already had a 35 spline 9-inch pumpkin setup on hand for the Mustang, I decided to stick with 35 spline axles, which honestly are probably overkill for this little lightweight car. But to save some weight and spend even more money, I ordered them gun drilled. They weren't cheap, but wow, are they nice units. Let's hope I measured everything right and they fit properly. It's Halloween season as I'm recording this, so it seems appropriate to refer to the rear end center section as the pumpkin. Again, because I'm crazy, I decided to do something different. Like this. If it doesn't look like your regular Ford 9-inch pumpkin, that's because it's not. It's actually a 12-bolt Chevy center section that fits in a Ford 9-inch housing. Now, why would I do something so crazy? 2 reasons. Well, 3 if you include because I'm crazy. First, this setup saves a bit of weight over a traditional 9-inch Ford pumpkin, even the aluminum ones. Secondly, and more importantly, because it's more efficient. The 12-bolt has less hypoid offset in the gear mesh, which is the distance between the center line of the pinion and the center line of the ring gear. A greater offset increases the sliding friction between the gear teeth. How much is it worth? Well, depending on whose test results you look at, the 12-bolt gives you anywhere from 2 to 3% more power to the wheels over a Ford unit. Now, 3% might not sound like much, but as a former stock eliminator racer, you'd sell your mother for 3%. For the Epic, that'll translate to about 30 horsepower at the wheels. Now, the downsides are it's not quite as strong as, say, a through-bolt Mark Williams 9-inch case, but the Epic will be light, with small tires, so it's not a huge concern. The other downside is that if I do indeed break it, replacement parts are certainly not as readily available as another 9-inch Ford case. I'm willing to take my chances on that. So the goal today is to mock up the rear end in the car, get the tires on, and make sure everything fits and all my measurements were correct. If everything checks out, then I can send out my street wheels to get rehooped with the right offset and start figuring out what I'm going to do for shock and wheelie bar brackets. Now the major part I'm missing in this setup is the ring and pinion set. Until the car is substantially complete and I know what it weighs, I can't yet make a decision on the gear ratio, so that'll happen later. In the meantime, I can still install the spool, axles, and brakes, so that's not holding us back at all at this point. So, let's get after it. Cue the time lapse. So we didn't get too far on the rear end buildup. For whatever reason, the pumpkin doesn't want to fit all the way onto the housing, and I haven't quite figured out why yet. It'll go within about 1/8 of an inch, and then it stops. And if you tighten down any particular side of it, then the thing just wants to rock back and forth. So I've checked the pumpkin for flatness against my straight edge. It's all flat. It looks to be machined okay. I checked the housing for flatness. It shouldn't have warped when I welded everything because I actually had a cast iron Ford 9-inch pumpkin bolted in there to hold everything flat. So I don't know if it's a problem with the bolt pattern on the aftermarket unit that just isn't as precise as it needs to be, and the studs are interfering. The further down it gets on the studs, the further off things get. But I'm going to get strange on the phone tomorrow before I start hacking on this thing and find out if other people have had similar problems and what their solutions might be. I don't want to just go in here and start drilling all these bolt holes over size. It's easy to take the aluminum off, but it's not as easy to put it back on if that wasn't the problem. I've checked for interference on everything on the inside. It looks good. The bearing caps aren't bottoming out on the far end of the housing. Yeah, I don't know. I can't see any obvious problems, but clearly there is a problem. So I can't really go any further until I figure this out. I don't want to get the housing underneath the car and then still have to, start modifying something. I need to get this sorted out first before anything goes into the car. So again, we'll get Strange on the phone and see what they have to say. So we'll pick it up after talking to them. So I talked to Strange, and they didn't think that there was anything wrong with their case, but they did say, and I quote, "It's not unusual to have to enlarge the bolt holes." So to check that the housing wasn't the problem, stock factory Ford 9-inch pumpkin drops right on, no problems at all. So the problem is in fact the bolt pattern on the Strange unit. Now, what's disappointing to me is that 25 years ago I bought a 9-inch aluminum Strange center section for the Mustang, a 35 spline big bearing unit, and had the exact same problem. I had to drill out the bolt holes in it to get it to fit. Now at the time that was going on to an aftermarket housing for a Moser, and I thought that the housing was the problem, but it turns out that Strange is the problem, and it turns out the problem still exists 25 years later, so that's kind of disappointing. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to drill out the bolt holes in my shiny new pumpkin until it fits on the housing. Now I'm going to try and keep from Strange, the upper, middle, and lower middle bolt holes are slightly smaller than the rest of them, so I'm assuming that's to try and get everything aligned on there properly. So we're going to try and continue with that theme. So we're going to keep the top and the bottom bolt hole small and original size, and then start enlarging the side holes until the thing fits, if possible, without having to enlarge the top or bottom. But ideally, we'd like to keep 2 holes, the minimum size for alignment, but we'll see what actually happens. We're going to start doing this one by one hole at a time until the thing fits. So wish me luck. So a whole bunch of metal shavings and drilling later, and it's not the holes that's the problem. In fact, what's happening is the driver's side bearing cap, the tips of it are hitting the housing on the inside here. I've never had that problem before. I guess the bearing caps are just that much bigger than the stock ones, so yeah, that's what the problem is. So we'll take a die grinder and round off the corners of those caps. It's in a non-stress area, so that's not going to weaken anything, and hopefully we can make the clearance that we need there. If not, we'll take a torch, we'll heat up the housing, and we'll bang in some relief dents where we need them. So as usual, I don't edit out the problems and the fails on this channel, so a little bit of grinding that I did on the cap wasn't enough, so had to get in there with a torch, put some heat to it, take a big ball peen hammer, and make a nice big clearance dent. But the good news is it fits now. And it's also good news that I didn't drill all of the holes out on the case, so the location of that thing is still really, really nice and tight and fixed, so it's not like it's slopping around on big loose holes. I snuck up on it little bit by little bit, and I noticed that as I was sneaking up on it, the situation wasn't getting better, and then I started investigating other things, and then that's when I discovered finally that the bearing cap was hitting the housing. So we got that problem fixed, so now let's get back to assembling. Well, let's get the housing in the car, and let's get the axles and brakes and everything assembled and see how my tire clearance looks. So we got it all in. I left off the axle retainers because I don't have tiny enough fingers to get in there to put the bolts in with the disc brake, parking brake stuff in there. So I'll have to figure out how to maybe remove the brakes, get the retainers in there, put the brake shoes back on. I'll see how much room there is to work behind the axle flanges. But yeah, that's going to be a nightmare if I have to deal with that on the road at some point, but we'll worry about that later. The other thing I didn't put in there was there's spacer rings that go between the axle hub and the center of the disc brake rotor, so it registers on the axle and not on the studs. And they need like just a tiny little bit, like a half a thou of work there before they fit on there. So I'll have to work on that yet too. But in the meantime, the axle's in. The measurements all look good. We've got the axle up here at what my ride height should be. The wheel opening's tight. I've got room to open things up on the front here. I was going to roll the lip on the rear, but now looking at it, it looks like I'm going to have to cut and move to get myself a bit more clearance for tire growth, because the bias ply tires will grow unlike a radial tire, so you need to leave room for that. Now, it looks simple, but I was hoping to use the outer wheelhouse, and there's a whole bunch of reinforcing in here too. So I'm going to have to just stick my head in the trunk for a while and try and figure out exactly what my plan is there. But anyway, I'm happy with everything fitting as good as it gets with a whole bunch of aftermarket stuff. The Mark Williams stuff was spot on. Just perfect. I mean, the strange pumpkin gave me some grief, but it's in there now. All of the measurements that went into tire location, axle width, housing width, the brake offset, tire locations, all of that stuff looks like it paid off, because everything is where I wanted it to be, where I expected it to be. There's no big surprises in there. So progress. It's been a long time, but we've actually got something done on the Epic. So again, I've got to figure out what my next plan is for this. I've got to figure out what I'm doing in there yet for shock brackets and what I'm doing to mount the wheelie bars. I still need to do the floor modifications in there to raise the floor, so I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to be tackling next, but I'm happy that the rear end is in and the tires are where they need to be and the wheel offset and all of that stuff was good. So now I can send out my street wheels and get them made with the correct offset, knowing that the street wheels are going to bolt right up there. And if you're curious what the street wheels are going to look like, they're going to be based off the standard GT style, English RO style or row style wheels. So this is a 14-inch wheel right now. We're going to take the centers out of this. We're going to put them into 15 by 8 hoops. And I'm going to run a 275/50 15 radial that is almost identical in size to the 10 by 26 slicks in here. So that's going to be the street setup. This is the race setup. To go from one to the other, we are going to have to drop the rear end down pretty far before I can get the tire out again. So it's going to be a system of disconnecting the shocks, dropping the axle down, pulling the tires out, swapping the other ones in, jacking it up, connecting the shocks. It's going to be a bit of a ordeal, but I'm not going to just go and radius the wheel opening for my convenience. Anyway, if you've watched this far, thanks for watching. Thanks for patiently waiting. If you're a fan of the Epic project, it's been a long time. Hopefully more updates will be coming soon, but we'll see how it goes. So share with your friends, like, comment. If you've got comments, I love the feedback. And until next time, remember, just be kind and be humble. Thanks for watching. So, as usual, I don't edit out the fails in this take two. So, as usual, I don't edit out take three.